You wouldn't believe what happened to me. 1 minute, I was just a proud owner of a prize bull, an animal I'd raised for years, something I cared about deeply. And then, out of nowhere, my neighbor, a well-known HOA member, pulled the trigger and shot him. Just like that. The bull, the symbol of my hard work and pride, was gone in an instant. It wasn't just about losing a valuable animal. It was a complete shock to my life. But the nightmare didn't stop there. After everything, she turned around and sued me for $1 million. Yeah, you heard that right. Me, the victim, being taken to court with demand for $1 million. The whole thing started quietly, but if you look back, there were signs. Living in a neighborhood governed by an HOA always comes with rules and regulations. Some make sense, some don't. And when you have animals, especially a big prize bull, it can stir up trouble fast. People worry about noise, smell, or safety. The HOA was strict about what was allowed, but I always thought I was following the rules. The bull was kept on my property, properly fenced and cared for. Still, tensions with some board members started rising. The neighbor who caused all this, let's just call her Karen, had always been difficult. She was known for being pushy, quick to complain, and extremely protective of the neighborhood rules, sometimes to a fault. At first, it was little things. Complaints about the bull's presence, whispers about how it didn't belong here, and warnings about noise. The HOA board sided with her more than once, sending notices and threatening fines. But nothing could have prepared me for what would happen next. What made Karen so dangerous wasn't just her attitude. It was how far she was willing to go. You know those people who take things personally and make it their mission to win no matter what? That was her. When the bull was just peacefully grazing one afternoon, she stormed onto my property. I wasn't home, but the damage was done. A single gunshot rang out. Neighbors heard it and rushed over, only to find the bull injured and bleeding. It was horrifying. The bull was more than just livestock. He was a prize winner, recognized at fairs, loved by the local ranching community. Losing him felt like losing a family member. The pain wasn't just physical. It cut deep into my heart and soul. What shocked me even more was how calm Karen was after the incident. She didn't deny it. She claimed it was necessary because the bull was a danger to the neighborhood, which was simply not true. As the news spread, the neighborhood was split. Some people whispered that maybe the bull was too big, too dangerous. Others saw it for what it was, a deliberate attack motivated by spite and control. I started getting calls and messages from neighbors who supported me, but also from those who warned me to back down. The HOA seemed to rally behind Karen, which felt like betrayal. Instead of protecting all residents fairly, they were protecting one of their own, no matter the cost. Then came the real shocker, the lawsuit. Karen, the person who shot my bull, was suing me for $1 million. The claim? She said I had harassed her, damaged her property, and caused her emotional distress. I was stunned. How could the victim be the one in trouble? How could someone who violated my property and my life turn the tables and demand millions from me? I talked to my lawyer, who told me this was unfortunately not unheard of in HOA battles. Some people use the legal system as a weapon, trying to scare others into silence or submission. The HOA's power can feel overwhelming, and they often have the money and influence to push residents around. But I wasn't about to give up without a fight. The bull's death was a crime, and suing me after that was just another attack. As I began to prepare my defense, I realized how many stories like mine were out there. People caught in nightmare situations with HOAs gone rogue. The fights aren't just about fences or paint colors. They can get ugly, personal, and expensive. And often, it's the residents who suffer the most. The day I found out about the lawsuit was one of the worst days of my life. I couldn't believe that after all the pain, the anger, and the heartbreak, the battle was far from over. The HOA and Karen were doubling down, using every tool to make life difficult. But what surprised me most was how many neighbors came forward with support. People who had faced their own HOA nightmares or simply believed in standing up for what's right. This wasn't just about one bull anymore. It was about fighting back against injustice, about protecting your rights when those in power try to silence you. and about never letting anyone take away what you've worked so hard for. Looking back, I never imagined this fight would escalate to $1 million lawsuit, or that it would turn my quiet life upside down. But here I was, standing at the center of a storm that wasn't going to end anytime soon. And I knew that the only way out was to face it head on, no matter the cost. Things didn't get any easier after the shooting. In fact, that was just the beginning of a battle I never saw coming. The moment Karen fired that shot, she didn't just take away my prize bull. She lit a fuse that would blow up my entire life. I thought maybe this would all blow over. Maybe the HOA would step in, do the right thing, and hold her accountable. But no, the situation quickly spiraled into something far worse. Almost immediately, the HOA started treating me like the problem. They acted like I was the one causing trouble in the neighborhood. Emails flooded my inbox, warning me about disturbances and violations, as if I had done something wrong by standing up for my property. It felt like a bad joke. I'm the one who lost a bull to a reckless neighbor, and now I'm being treated like the villain? But I kept my head down and tried to handle things calmly. I knew I had to be smart, or this would just get uglier. Meanwhile, Karen didn't stop. Instead of backing off, she doubled down. She went around telling neighbors that I was dangerous, that my bull had been aggressive, and that I was somehow threatening the community. It was all lies, but in small towns and close neighborhoods, rumors spread fast. I started noticing strange looks from people who had been my friends. It was like my reputation was being torn apart bit by bit, just like my property had been. Then the letter arrived, a thick envelope full of legal jargon and threats. Karen was suing me. The amount? $1 million. The claim? That I had harassed her, damaged her property, and caused her emotional distress. It felt unreal. I kept rereading it, thinking there must be some mistake. How could she have the nerve to take me to court after what she did? I was still grieving my bull, and now I was being dragged into a legal nightmare. I immediately reached out to a lawyer, hoping to get some advice. That's when I learned how twisted HOA battles can get. These organizations have rules, sure, but sometimes they use those rules as weapons. They lean on the law, on lawsuits, to bully residents into silence. It was like an unfair fight, with me on one side, barely able to keep my balance, and Karen, and the HOA on the other, armed with lawyers and money. But I wasn't going to back down. Not after everything. I gathered evidence. Photos of the bull, vet records, witness statements from neighbors who saw what happened. I wanted to prove the truth. The bull hadn't been aggressive. Karen had no right to take that shot. And her lawsuit was just a desperate attempt to scare me into giving up. The legal process was exhausting. Phone calls, paperwork, meetings with lawyers. It all became a full-time job. And it drained me. Financially and emotionally, I was stretched thin. The stress was overwhelming. Every day brought new challenges. Strange phone calls, threats, and whispers in the neighborhood. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying that moment when the bull was shot, trying to make sense of it all. What made it worse was how the HOA behaved. Instead of stepping in as neutral mediators, they seemed to side with Karen. The board meetings became battlegrounds, with residents divided and voices raised. Some people stood by me. Others backed the HOA or stayed silent. I realized this wasn't just a personal fight anymore. It was a larger issue about power and control in the community. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to before started reaching out with stories of their own. Tales of petty harassment, unfair fines, and bullying by the HOA. Suddenly, my story was part of a bigger picture, a struggle many faced, but few dared to speak about openly. It gave me strength, knowing I wasn't alone, but it also highlighted how toxic the whole system had become. Through it all, I kept thinking about the bull, how proud I was of him, how much work it took to raise him right, the way he'd stand tall in the pasture, commanding respect. Losing him wasn't just a financial loss. It was a blow to my identity and my spirit. And knowing Karen could get away with it, that crushed me. But this fight was about more than just revenge or money. It was about standing up for what's right, about refusing to let someone destroy your life and walk away free. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. The lawsuit dragged on, but I stayed determined. Every phone call, every court date was a reminder that I had to keep fighting. I thought about all the people who had animals, who loved their homes, who faced similar battles. What would they do? How would they survive the pressure? The HOA and Karen's actions weren't just isolated incidents. They were warnings. Warnings about what happens when power is abused and voices are silenced. The support from the community grew slowly. Some neighbors who had stayed quiet began to speak up. Others offered help with legal advice or just a listening ear. It reminded me that even in the darkest times, there's strength in numbers. Together, people can push back against injustice. Still, the fear lingered. I worried about what the HOA might do next. Fines? More lawsuits? Property restrictions? It felt like I was walking on thin ice, not knowing when the next blow would come. But I knew I couldn't let fear control me. As I prepared for the next court hearing, I thought back to that moment when everything changed, the shot that destroyed more than just a bull. It started a war that was far from over, but it also showed me who I really was. Someone who refused to be silenced, no matter the cost. The days after the lawsuit was filed felt like walking through a storm with no end in sight. Every time I thought I had caught a break, something else would hit me. Emails from the HOA kept piling up, demanding paperwork, threatening fines, and insisting I follow rules that seemed made just to make my life miserable. Karen's lawsuit hung over me like a dark cloud. I had never imagined that owning a prize bull would lead to a legal battle that could cost me everything. One thing I quickly realized was how lonely this fight could get. Most people didn't want to get involved. Some feared the HOA's power. Others just thought it wasn't their problem. But the silence was deafening. I kept asking myself, why am I the only one standing up to this? It was frustrating because many neighbors had their own issues with the HOA, but no one dared to speak out loud. The fear of retaliation was real. At first, I focused all my energy on the legal side, collecting documents, talking to my lawyer, preparing evidence. But I also started noticing something else happening. Karen's story was being spread around town like wildfire, but in her favor. According to her, I was a troublemaker. I was reckless with my bull, threatening the safety of the neighborhood. It was crazy. I knew the truth, but convincing others was harder than I thought. The neighborhood split into two groups. One side stood with me, believing I was the victim of a bully. The other sided with Karen and the HOA, trusting their version of events. It was like being caught in the middle of a war. Friends I'd known for years suddenly avoided me. Some even stopped returning my calls. It was a tough pill to swallow. I realized this fight wasn't just about me anymore. It had become a community divide. At the HOA meetings, things got tense. Karen and her supporters acted like they owned the place. They pushed for stricter rules, tighter surveillance, and harsher penalties for anyone who stepped out of line. I sat in the back, watching as they slowly tightened their grip on the neighborhood. It was like a power grab disguised as community care. I wondered how many other families were quietly suffering like I was. Despite all this, I refused to back down. I reminded myself why I was fighting. To protect my property, my rights, and my dignity. The bull was gone, but his memory fueled my determination. Every morning, I woke up ready to face whatever new challenge the HOA or Karen threw my way. The pressure was immense, but so was my will to keep going. I also started reaching out to others outside the neighborhood. There are groups and forums where people share their HOA horror stories, and suddenly, I wasn't alone anymore. Hearing other people's experiences gave me hope and new ideas on how to fight back. It was like finding a lifeline in the middle of a storm. People shared tips on handling legal battles, dealing with HOA intimidation, and protecting your home. The financial strain was another challenge. Legal battles aren't cheap, and the lawsuit demanded $1 million, an amount that felt impossible to even imagine paying. I had to be careful with every penny, cutting back on things, juggling bills, and working extra hours. The stress was constant. I knew that if I let the pressure get to me, I might lose everything I'd worked so hard for. Then came the court hearings. Walking into the courtroom was nerve-wracking. I was facing Karen and her lawyers, staring down a fight that felt unfair on so many levels. The tension was thick. I listened as accusations were thrown back and forth, feeling my heart race every time Karen spoke. She painted me as a reckless, dangerous neighbor, someone who caused more trouble than she did. But I stayed calm, knowing the truth was on my side. During breaks, I talked to witnesses who came forward to support me. Their words gave me strength. People saw what happened that day, the shooting, the aftermath. They knew how much the bull meant to me. Having their backing felt like a shield against a barrage of lies and attacks. At home, the fight took a toll on my family too. Loved ones worried about me, about what this battle was doing to my health and happiness. I didn't want to drag them into this mess, but their support became my anchor. We held on to the hope that justice would eventually win out. One thing I noticed through all this was how the HOA's power wasn't just about rules. It was about control. They seemed more interested in keeping their authority than protecting residents. It was frustrating to see how easily they could use their influence to push people around, all while hiding behind legal jargon and fancy letters. As the case dragged on, I began documenting everything. Every email, every threat, every unfair demand. It was exhausting, but necessary. I wanted to make sure that if this went to trial, there would be no doubt about who was really in the wrong. Karen's claim of $1 million felt ridiculous, but I wasn't about to let her bully me out of my home. Through all the stress, I found small moments of peace, time spent outdoors, quiet evenings reflecting on what I was fighting for. It wasn't just about the bull anymore. It was about standing up to injustice, about making sure no one else had to suffer the way I did. The fight was far from over, but with every step, I felt a little stronger, a little more certain that the truth would come out. And even though the road ahead looked long and uncertain, I wasn't ready to give up. Not now. Not ever. The tension in the neighborhood reached a new level after those courtroom battles began. Every day felt like walking on a tightrope. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering what the HOA or Karen might try next. They weren't just content with the lawsuit. No, they seemed determined to make my life unbearable in every possible way. I started noticing things around my property that weren't right. Small damages to fences, strange footprints near my barn, even missing tools. It was subtle at first, but it grew worse. I reported everything to the HOA and local police, hoping they'd step in. But the HOA's response was disappointing. They acted like it was normal neighborhood squabbling and didn't offer much help. It felt like I was fighting a battle on two fronts, the lawsuit and the daily harassment. Neighbors I thought I could trust started avoiding me. Invitations to community events stopped. People who once greeted me warmly now looked away or whispered as I passed. It was isolating. I couldn't help but wonder if Karen had poisoned their minds against me. The rumor mill was in full swing, and it wasn't painting me in a good light. One afternoon, a neighbor I barely knew came over. She said she'd seen Karen near my property, talking loudly about teaching me a lesson. Hearing those words sent chills down my spine. I realized this wasn't just a legal fight anymore. It had become personal. Karen was using every tool she had, including intimidation and threats, to push me out. It was clear she wanted control, and I was standing in her way. The HOA board meetings became more heated too. Karen's supporters were vocal, pushing for even more restrictions on property owners, especially those with animals or any unapproved structures. They framed it as protecting the neighborhood's image and safety. But I saw it for what it was, a campaign to squeeze me and anyone like me who didn't fit their mold. The meetings felt less like community gatherings and more like hostile takeovers. Despite everything, I tried to keep my head up. I reminded myself why I was fighting. It wasn't just about my prize bull, or even me personally anymore. It was about standing up for the little guy. For anyone who's ever felt powerless against a system designed to control rather than protect, I wasn't going to let fear or isolation win. One night, I found a note slipped under my door. No signature, just a simple message. Back off or else. It was the most direct threat yet. My heart raced as I read it, but I didn't respond. Instead, I took photos and showed it to my lawyer and the police. They said it was evidence of harassment and intimidation. But still, the HOA didn't take it seriously. The emotional toll was crushing. I had moments where I felt completely overwhelmed, wondering if it was all worth it. The stress affected my sleep, my work, my relationships. My family did their best to support me, but I could see the worry in their eyes. I tried to shield them from the worst of it, but some things are impossible to hide. At the same time, I learned to lean on the few neighbors who stood by me. Their kindness and encouragement were like rays of sunlight in a dark storm. They helped me organize, gather more evidence, and even attend some of the HOA meetings to show I wasn't alone. It reminded me that even when it feels like the whole world is against you, there are still allies out there. I also started sharing my story online, connecting with people who had faced similar battles. The support from strangers was unexpected but powerful. They offered advice, shared resources, and cheered me on. It became clear that my fight was part of a much bigger problem. The way some HOAs abuse their power and crush residents who dare to stand up. One surprising moment came when an independent investigator I hired uncovered evidence that the HOA had ignored previous complaints about Karen's behavior. There were records of her being warned about other incidents, but never facing real consequences. It felt like a cover-up. The HOA wasn't interested in fairness. They were protecting their own. With this new information, I felt a surge of hope. If the truth could come out, maybe the tide would turn. I prepared to bring it to court and the community. But I knew Karen and the HOA wouldn't give up easily. They had too much to lose. The battle was far from over. Every day, I faced new challenges, legal threats, harassment, and the constant fear of what might come next. But I also found strength I didn't know I had. The fight had changed me. It pushed me to be braver, smarter, and more determined than ever before. I realized that sometimes standing up to bullies means risking everything. But it's also the only way to protect what matters most. In the quiet moments, when the noise of conflict faded, I thought about the bull again, about the pride I felt raising him and the injustice of losing him to someone who should have been a neighbor, not an enemy. That memory was both painful and powerful, a reminder of why I had to keep fighting. No matter how hard it got, I couldn't let this end with Karen getting away with what she did. The road ahead looked long and uncertain, but I was ready to walk it. Every setback only fueled my resolve. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was standing up for everyone who's ever been pushed down by unfair rules and ruthless people. The fight for justice had become my mission, and I wasn't turning back. The lawsuit kept dragging on, and with it, the pressure on me only grew. Every day brought new surprises, and not the good kind. Karen's legal team was relentless. They filed motion after motion, trying to delay proceedings, demanding more documents, and throwing accusations my way that had no basis in reality. It was exhausting. I felt like I was constantly running just to stay in the same place. At the same time, the HOA stepped up their own tactics. I started getting notices about supposed violations, things like improper fence maintenance or unauthorized structures. I knew these claims were fabricated to wear me down. I'd fix one thing, only to get another notice a few days later. It was harassment disguised as rules enforcement. I couldn't help but think this was coordinated, a way to squeeze me out quietly. It wasn't just paperwork, either. One morning, I found my mailbox vandalized, smashed, and broken. No note, no explanation. Just a clear message that someone wanted me to feel unwelcome. My gut told me it was connected to the ongoing conflict. I reported it to police, but without witnesses, there wasn't much they could do. The feeling of being targeted, isolated, and under attack became my new normal. Amid all this chaos, I realized how important it was to stay organized. I created folders for every piece of evidence: emails, photos, letters, and witness statements. It was tedious work, but necessary. I knew that if this went to trial, every detail would matter. I had to build a case that was airtight. The stakes were too high to leave anything to chance. My lawyer warned me to keep a low profile, to avoid getting involved in neighborhood gossip or confrontations. But that wasn't easy. Karen's supporters seemed determined to spread rumors and lies about me. I heard whispers about dangerous animals and threatening behavior. None of it was true, but it was hard to stop the damage once the story started. I felt like I was fighting an invisible enemy, one that used words instead of weapons, but was just as harmful. The community was divided more than ever. Some neighbors expressed sympathy and offered quiet support. Others stayed silent, unwilling to take sides. And a few openly sided with Karen in the HOA, enjoying the chaos or hoping to gain favor. The division made everything harder. What used to be a friendly neighborhood felt like a battlefield. In those difficult moments, I found strength in unexpected places. I reconnected with old friends and made new ones through online groups dedicated to HOA disputes and property rights. People shared stories, advice, and encouragement. It was a reminder that I wasn't alone, and that many had faced similar battles and come out stronger. Their stories kept me going. One day, I got a call from a local reporter interested in my story. They wanted to know about the shooting, the lawsuit, and the ongoing conflict with the HOA. I was hesitant at first. Opening up meant exposing myself even more, risking backlash. But I realized this could be an opportunity to shed light on what was happening, not just to me, but to anyone trapped under control of a powerful HOA. I agreed to the interview. The article ran a few weeks later and sparked more conversations than I expected. Suddenly, neighbors who had stayed quiet started reaching out. Some apologized for doubting me. Others shared their own experiences with HOA harassment. It was a turning point. The story gave a voice to those who felt powerless and brought more attention to the toxic environment Karen and the HOA had created. That attention came with risks, though. Karen and the HOA board weren't happy about the publicity. They accused me of stirring up trouble and damaging the neighborhood's reputation. I received more threatening messages and noticed strangers lurking near my property. The fight was escalating, but I refused to be intimidated. Meanwhile, the legal battle continued. Depositions, hearings, and negotiations filled my calendar. Every step was draining, but I kept reminding myself that this wasn't just about winning a case. It was about standing up to bullying and fighting for fairness. I wanted to protect my home and send a message that no one should be silenced or pushed out by fear. During this time, I also worked on rebuilding my property and moving forward. Losing my prize bull was heartbreaking, but I refused to let that loss define me. I started looking into ways to improve the land, secure my fences, and prepare for whatever came next. It was a way to reclaim control, to show that Karen's actions wouldn't break me. I also became more involved in community advocacy, connecting with groups that fight against HOA abuses. I learned about tenant rights, property laws, and ways to hold HOAs accountable. The knowledge gave me new tools and renewed determination. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was becoming a voice for others facing similar battles. At night, when the stress was the worst, I'd think about the bull, the hours spent caring for him, training him, and watching him grow. It was hard to let go of the anger and pain, but I found moments of peace in remembering the good times. Those memories reminded me why I had to keep fighting. Not just for me, but for the pride and love I had invested. Through the ups and downs, I learned that standing up to powerful opponents isn't easy. It takes courage, resilience, and support. The fight with Karen and the HOA was testing every part of me, but it was also teaching me what I was truly capable of. I was no longer just a victim. I was a fighter, and I wasn't going anywhere. As the legal battle dragged on, the tension in the neighborhood only seemed to grow thicker. Karen wasn't just content with filing that outrageous $1 million lawsuit against me. She was now acting like she had the whole place under her thumb. Every interaction with the HOA felt like stepping into a trap, where every question I asked was met with cold silence or vague threats. I started to realize this wasn't just about one bull or one lawsuit. It was a power struggle, and I was smack in the middle of it. One of the hardest things was the constant unpredictability. Some days, I'd hear rumors about new restrictions being pushed through by the HOA. Other days, I'd get letters threatening fines for things that didn't even apply to my property. It was like they were inventing reasons to harass me, hoping I'd slip up or get frustrated enough to give up. I wasn't about to let that happen. I knew I had to stay sharp and document everything. It wasn't easy, though. The stress got under my skin. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, thinking about court dates, the mounting bills, and how this whole thing was affecting my family. My spouse tried to be my rock, but even they struggled with the weight of it all. Our kids sensed the tension, too, and I hated that this conflict was touching every part of our lives. Despite the pressure, I kept pushing forward. I spent hours poring over legal documents, researching HOA laws, and strategizing with my lawyer. We worked on building a strong defense, not just to fight Karen's absurd claims, but to expose how the HOA was abusing its power. The more I learned, the more it became clear that this fight was bigger than me. There were so many stories out there, hidden under the surface, about HOAs running roughshod over residents. One surprising breakthrough came when a longtime neighbor, who had been quiet all along, decided to speak up. They shared stories about Karen's temper, how she bullied others quietly before I even moved in. Suddenly, I wasn't just fighting this battle alone. I had proof that Karen's behavior was part of a pattern, and that the HOA had turned a blind eye for years. It gave me hope and a new sense of purpose. At the same time, the community was changing around me. Some neighbors who had supported me from the start became even more vocal, organizing meetings and petitions to challenge the HOA's harsh policies. Others, unfortunately, doubled down on their loyalty to Karen, convinced by her version of events. The neighborhood was split, and it felt like the tension could snap at any moment. I tried to stay out of the drama as much as possible, but it was hard. Karen seemed to go out of her way to provoke me. One day, I found that someone had deliberately blocked my driveway with a pile of construction materials. Another time, my mailbox was painted over with threatening words. These acts of intimidation were not just cruel, they were illegal. I reported everything, but without solid proof. It was difficult to get authorities to act. Still, I refused to be cowed. I kept documenting, gathering witness statements, and collecting any evidence I could find. My lawyer and I discussed the possibility of countersuing for harassment and defamation. It was a risky move, but I was ready to fight back on all fronts. Karen and the HOA had started this war, and I wasn't about to let them win by default. The court hearings were nerve-wracking. Sitting across from Karen, watching her smirk and make bold accusations, tested my patience. But I stayed calm, focusing on the facts and the truth. My lawyer did an amazing job presenting the evidence, and I could tell the judge was paying close attention. It felt like a small victory, just to be heard. Outside the courtroom, life didn't pause. I had to keep working, managing the property, and taking care of my family. The bull was gone, but the land still held memories, good and bad. Sometimes I'd walk to the pasture, thinking about what I had lost and what I was fighting to protect. Those quiet moments helped me recharge. I also found unexpected support from other property owners who had dealt with similar HOA nightmares. We exchanged stories and advice, and I realized I wasn't alone in this battle. These connections reminded me that standing up against powerful organizations can be done, and often it's necessary. Even though the fight was draining, I started to notice subtle changes. A few neighbors who had been silent before began speaking up, inspired by the courage of others. The HOA board meetings grew more contentious, and some members began questioning Karen's aggressive tactics. It felt like the tide might be shifting slowly but surely. I kept reminding myself that this wasn't just about winning a lawsuit or proving a point. It was about standing up for fairness, for the right to enjoy my home without fear or harassment. Every challenge, every setback, was part of a larger story about fighting back when the odds seemed stacked against you. The journey was far from over, and I knew more battles awaited. But with every step, I felt more prepared, more determined, and more connected to the people who believed in justice. This fight had changed me, made me stronger, wiser, and more fearless than I ever thought possible. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface exploded into a new level of chaos. Karen didn't hold back anymore. It was clear she saw me not just as a nuisance, but as a threat to everything she thought she owned in that neighborhood. One afternoon, I got a call from my lawyer that shook me to my core. Karen had taken things further. She claimed to have evidence that I was dangerous and irresponsible, and she wanted a restraining order against me. I was stunned. Dangerous? Irresponsible? The irony was brutal. This was the same woman who had shot my prize bull, and then turned around and sued me for $1 million. But now she wanted me legally barred from my own property? It felt like a bad joke. The timing was suspicious, too. It was just weeks before a big court hearing where I planned to expose the truth about her and the HOA's harassment. I knew I couldn't let that restraining order slide. If granted, it would cripple me and give Karen more power to push me out completely. I spent days with my lawyer, preparing to fight the claim. We gathered every piece of evidence to show my responsible behavior. Photos, witnesses, even video footage from my property cameras. It was a painful reminder of how far this fight had come. I wasn't just defending my land anymore. I was defending my reputation, my right to live in peace. Meanwhile, Karen's supporters in the neighborhood seemed emboldened by her actions. I started noticing more signs of hostility. Graffiti on fences, angry notes slipped under doors, even anonymous phone calls late at night. It was harassment designed to wear me down, to make me question if standing up was worth it. But I couldn't let fear win. I reminded myself why I started this fight in the first place. In the midst of the chaos, a few neighbors stepped up. They offered to testify on my behalf, sharing stories about Karen's history of aggressive behavior and the strange power plays by the HOA. Their willingness to speak out was a game changer. It showed me that even in a divided community, people still care about fairness and justice. Those allies became my lifeline. The courtroom battles were draining, but they also gave me moments of clarity. Sitting there, hearing Karen's accusations and watching her try to twist the truth, I realized how much was riding on this. It wasn't just about me or my bull anymore. It was about standing up against a system that could crush anyone who dared to push back. The judge listened carefully, weighing the evidence, and I held on a hope that justice would prevail. Outside the legal arena, my personal life was feeling the strain. The stress seeped into every corner. Sleepless nights, tense conversations with family, and the constant worry about what might happen next. I struggled to keep my emotions in check. But through it all, my family stood by me, reminding me that I wasn't fighting alone. Their support was my anchor in the storm. I also found strength in unexpected places. Online forums and support groups connected me with people who had faced similar HOA nightmares. They shared stories of bullying, unfair fines, and community chaos. Knowing that my experience wasn't isolated gave me courage. It also helped me learn new strategies to protect myself and others. During one particularly tough week, I got a call from a local advocacy group focused on property rights. They had heard about my case and offered help, legal advice, public support, and even media connections. It was a reminder that when you stand up against injustice, allies can appear where you least expect them. This new support network reinvigorated my fight and gave me new tools to challenge the HOA's power. Despite all the setbacks, I refused to back down. I spent hours reviewing every detail of the case, talking to witnesses, and preparing for upcoming hearings. I was determined to show that Karen's lawsuit was baseless and that her actions were motivated by spite and greed. Every document I gathered, every testimony I recorded, was a step toward exposing the truth. One night, as I sat going over files, I thought about the bull again, how much he meant to me, not just as an animal, but as a symbol of everything I was fighting for: freedom, respect, and fairness. Losing him was a deep wound, but it also fueled my determination. I wasn't just seeking revenge. I was fighting to make sure no one else would suffer like I did. The neighborhood was changing in ways I never expected. Some residents began questioning the HOA's harsh rules and Karen's aggressive tactics. Small gatherings and meetings started happening, with people demanding transparency and fairness. It felt like a slow but steady shift, a community waking up to the problems beneath the surface. I took part in those meetings whenever I could, hoping to be a voice for those who had been silenced. I knew that this fight was far from over. Karen wasn't the kind of person to quit easily, and the HOA had deep pockets and connections. But I also knew something important, that standing up to bullies requires courage, persistence, and sometimes the willingness to endure hardship. I was ready for whatever came next. Even on the hardest days, when it felt like the world was against me, I reminded myself that fighting for what's right is never easy. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but I was no longer the scared person who started this journey. I was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to protect my home, my family, and my dignity. By the time the trial date finally came around, the tension in the air was almost unbearable. Months of back and forth, countless meetings, legal filings, and heated exchanges had brought me to this moment. I wasn't just fighting for my property or my lost bull anymore. I was fighting for my entire way of life. And I knew that whatever happened in that courtroom would change everything. Walking into the courthouse that morning, I felt a mixture of nerves and determination. The place was buzzing with people, lawyers, neighbors, even a few reporters who had caught wind of the story. Karen was there too, looking confident as ever, surrounded by her legal team and supporters. But I wasn't intimidated. I had spent months preparing, gathering evidence, and building a case that no one could ignore. The judge called the court to order, and the proceedings began. Karen's lawyer started with a dramatic presentation, painting me as a reckless property owner who endangered the neighborhood. They brought up the shooting incident, tried to twist it to make me look like the villain, but my lawyer was ready. We countered with facts, photos, and testimonies that showed the truth, how Karen's aggression started the conflict, how the HOA had harassed me, and how I had acted responsibly throughout. Witness after witness took the stand. Neighbors who had seen Karen's behavior firsthand described her temper and intimidation tactics. Experts testified about the property boundaries and the legal rights I held. It felt like the truth was finally breaking through the smoke and mirrors. Each statement chipped away at Karen's story and exposed a real problem, an HOA run by people abusing their power. One moment that stuck with me was when my lawyer asked me to describe my relationship with the bull, what he meant to me, and how much care I put into raising him. It wasn't just an animal. He was part of my family, a symbol of my hard work and dedication. I could see some in the courtroom soften at that, realizing this was about more than just property disputes. Karen's team tried everything to discredit me, but the evidence was overwhelming. They looked frustrated, their confidence slipping. The judge asked tough questions, showing she was paying close attention and wasn't buying the exaggerated claims. For the first time in months, I allowed myself a small breath of hope. Outside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. Neighbors who had stayed neutral or silent were now talking openly. Some approached me with apologies and offers of support. It was a strange feeling to go from being the outsider and target to someone standing up for fairness in a divided community. The media coverage picked up too. The story of the HOA Karen and the $1 million lawsuit made headlines, shining a spotlight on the dangers of unchecked HOA power. People across the region shared their own stories, and advocacy groups used the case to push for reforms. It was surreal to see how my personal battle had sparked a broader conversation. At home, the pressure didn't disappear. There were still whispers, some resentment, and the constant challenge of rebuilding what had been lost. But I found new strength in knowing that my fight wasn't just for me. It was for everyone who had ever felt powerless against the system stacked against them. The days after the trial were a whirlwind. Waiting for the judge's final decision was nerve-wracking. Every call, every letter felt like it might hold a verdict that would decide my future. I kept busy with the property, family, and planning next steps no matter what happened. Then came the ruling. The judge sided with me on key points, dismissing Karen's lawsuit and recognizing the harassment I endured. She ordered the HOA to stop their unfair tactics and pay for some of my legal fees. It wasn't a total victory, but it was a huge step toward justice. Karen's power was finally being checked. The decision sent ripples through the neighborhood. Some people celebrated openly, while others quietly reconsidered their loyalty to the HOA board. I hoped this would be the beginning of real change, not just for me, but for everyone living under HOA control. Reflecting on the journey, I realized how much I had learned about resilience, community, and standing up for what's right. The fight had been exhausting and painful, but it also showed me that no matter how small or outmatched you feel, you can make a difference when you refuse to give in. Even now, the scars remain, the loss of my bull, the strained relationships, the battle scars of a long legal fight. But they remind me of what I endured and overcame, and they keep me grounded, ready for whatever challenges might come next. The story isn't over. There are still conversations to be had, reforms to push for, and healing to do. But one thing is clear. I am not the same person who started this fight. I am stronger, braver, and more determined to protect what's mine, and to stand up for anyone facing the same kind of injustice.